Hi again, everybody, and welcome to Masters of Supply Chain News Digest. I'm joined by my friend Nadim and a mutual friend of ours, Peter Gibbons. Peter, welcome. Peter has a long background in supply chain. You were at ICI, you moved then to Starbucks, to Mattel, to you were the CEO of tires.com, and then most recently leading the big industrial 3M organization in their supply chain. And if I'm not mistaken, Nadim actually followed you into the role at Starbucks, right? Was that is that
Yeah,
our connection
I
here?
think Nadim, I hired you into Starbucks. Is that right? Back
Yes.
in what was that, 2010?
Yeah, 2011. Yeah, we
2011.
intersected at Starbucks. Exactly. Yeah, we
Yeah,
stayed in touch since then.
absolutely. Good to
Terrific.
see you.
So, there's a lot of stuff we can talk about when you think about news and supply chain. The tariff news continues to change. Apparently, we're friends with China now, and everything's going to be good. Stand down. We've seen more about cybersecurity and also just general theft, particularly in North America and supply chains. People getting in, hacking systems, diverting trucks. And then I think there's a lot of discussion about just the networks in general and whether or not we're built for resilience or sort of built for one thing, and we're finding that those things are challenged. Peter, you've had to deal with tariffs in every one of your jobs, I would imagine. You're importing coffee from all over the world. You're importing chemicals at ICI. Certainly, Mattel had a large import kind of a thing to navigate. Is this another sort of existential change, and how do you think about these challenges we're facing?
Yeah, thanks, John. It's good to see you and talk about these things that are close to our hearts. It is interesting just the up and down. I've heard you comment on it in some of these podcasts. Like every day is different. Every day is different. Uh, and pre-COVID, we had that kind of period where over many, many years we'd built up these huge global supply chains that were working pretty well. And now here we are in the middle of our second massive shock, and this one kind of self-inflicted. Yeah. Uh, and I think we're all trying to work out what do we do about it? How do we manage working capital? How do we manage cash? What moves can we make immediately? But as I talk to people, there's an interesting thread developing as I talk to other supply chain leaders and some recent CEO conversations. Uh, they're kind of standing back saying, hey, we can get through this for a few months, but what do we tell our shareholders in the street 6, 9, 12 months from now when they ask the fundamental questions? So what have you learned and what have you changed? You've maybe
Right.
put some prices up, you've maybe made some moves, you've warned us about earnings. A lot of people jumping on the bandwagon rightfully just now saying, watch out for earnings this year. And that will buy a bit of time. But at some point, and we've all been in these seats, the CEO is going to come and say, so fundamentally, what are we going to do here? And I don't think it's about right answers anymore. I think it's about how well do we understand all of the movements and sourcing rules and constraints and dependencies do you have in your supply chain? And how good are we at discussing that with our business colleagues and coming up with a kind of broad range plan as to where we're trying to get to? We've built these really complex supply chains, and now we've been, shaken twice, probably due to be stirred now after two shakes, but shaken and stirred. And I'm just wondering whether this is the time where we stand back and say, it's time to take a fundamental review as to these big supply chains we've built. Do we really understand them? Are we able to articulate better all the dependencies and all the complexities? And are there new decisions we'd make? Don't have perfect information, but are there different decisions we'd make going forward? Should we be looking afresh at how we built these big, complex, intertwined supply chains?
I think it's really interesting. Nadim and I have talked about this as well. This idea of maybe we're not going to. I grew up in a supply chain where there was a right answer, right?
Yeah.
But largely it was free trade. Your job was to optimize and set up, and they may have some complexities, but they always paid for themselves. And now with everything moving all the time, maybe there is no right answer. Maybe there's just a set of answers and levers that we can pull. Nadim, how do you it sort of begets this understanding deeper into the supply chain, not only your suppliers, your suppliers' suppliers. And I used to describe sometimes for the businesses, we've set up some things that we have to understand. I'm not exactly sure what happens when you push the red button. I hear you telling me to do that, but I'm not exactly sure what's going to happen next. It required a level of visibility and understanding. What's been your experience in this area? How do you sort of sift through when there is no right answer? There's a solution set of potential options.
I think, John, similar to what Peter was mentioning, you take a step back and you look at what you've got. And it is a dynamic situation. The backdrop has evolved from what it used to be more stable, I would say 5, 6 years ago, to something that's more dynamic today. For me, it's about splitting off what you control and what you don't control. So you increase your ability to react with speed to what you don't control. What you control are your basic operational parameters within supply chain: plan, source, make, deliver. How much do you, like Peter said, how much do you know what you've got? How deep do you understand your suppliers, suppliers? How well diversified you are, and diversification is taking on a different aspect of things nowadays. In diversification, meaning not necessarily going into one country and then everything else is local, but how much are you, like say China, are you into other Asian countries that give you similar advantages versus China? But back to controlling what you control in terms of operational excellence, understanding your cost basis, making sure there is nothing lurking within your safety, your quality, your distribution network. How well do you understand your cost and your cost levers? If you're in control with those basics, then you've increased your ability to deal with whatever comes that is a surprise, like what we've been dealing with lately.
So, but you tend to leave money on the table, right? I mean, there's in any given situation, there is a sort of an optimal. How do you assess sort of where the trade-offs are, and how much are you willing to leave on the table in order to avoid what might happen but hasn't happened yet? How do you guys think through that?
So I think there's a new trend developing, John and Nadim, which is, and you mentioned the word complexity, John, earlier. I think there's good complexity and bad complexity, and I think you're right. The good complexity we get rewarded from, and we can control it. We like to control it. We know it works. It's rooting out some of the bad complexity, which is holding us back at times like this. It's all these extra, dare I say it, portfolio, right? Is the portfolio really being thought through? Product design, are there big opportunities in product design, more common components, fewer raw materials? Are we looking at, consolidating raw material suppliers more effectively? And there's no right answers to any of these things, but I do wonder whether there's something in this. Nadim talked about diversification. You mentioned complexity at the beginning. I'm looking at this thinking of network as well. It's how do we peel this back? Are we good enough at peeling it back and getting visibility to all the different steps? I'll give you an example. I'm not here to talk about 3M or talk on their behalf because I've retired now, but it's public knowledge. 1,100 plus interplant lanes at 3M. So there are 1,100 connections between factories at 3M. It'd be a lot easier if it was 500. Hard to go from 1,100 to 500, but right. At a time like this, it would be a lot easier to jump into this if you had fewer of those connections, and which ones are really value add and which ones are just adding complexity.
Right, and we could afford it when oil was $50 a barrel, and we were just navigating through at 100. We never fixed it, and now we're left with how do you navigate disruptions with all this sort of network we've built. I had a boss who said once, I meet complexity with simplicity. And it's interesting to hear you guys talk. If the answer is I don't know what's coming next, I'd like to not know what's coming next on fewer things, because it just gives me more optionality, right? If the more dispersed I am, the more options I've got, or more requirements I've got, the less optionality I have. To your point around 1,100 lanes or 13,000 suppliers, or the complexity of our design. Nadim, have you experience it the same way? And I know you and I have talked about operational excellence being sort of that pillar, and then we build from that.
Yeah, it's I'm gonna give you an example. I think between leaving money on the table and flexibility or dealing with the ability to be nimble, right? You can be highly, highly efficient and not leave a penny on the table. And if you're dealing with a commoditized product, you want to be in that space because there's very little creativity that's required. But if you're in that highly efficient state, then you're giving up flexibility, you're giving up speed, you're giving up creativity. You could be 100% creative, fast, nimble, but you're not cost efficient. Then you're leaving a lot of money on the table, obviously, because you're trying to enable growth in a creative, highly innovative space. Depending on where you are in your industry and what products you're driving, you want to find the sweet spot for you and manage that. And that could evolve. It doesn't have to be like this one way or another forever, but it's important to understand where you are today, given the context and the backdrop that we're dealing with, and articulate where you are. Peter, you brought up a question about what are CEOs looking for. It's from us, it's an explanation of here are the options that we have. We can be extremely, extremely efficient, and there's no money left on the table. You got all of it, you're taking all of it down to the bottom line. But then my speed is limited. My ability to react is going to be very limited. I can swing the other way and give you a little bit less money, but then I have a better ability to protect the top line and be creative alongside marketing, sales, and innovation. What do you think, Peter?
Oh no, I think you did some work on this in one of your previous jobs, looking at the product range and what you're going to be really efficient at, and what was more commodity and what was less commodity. I think you did that in one of your recent assignments, really, really effectively in the business you were in. And I can't quite remember what drove it, but I remember us talking about it, and you're really doing some great work analysing and breaking it all down and understanding what were the key factors and key success factors for each part of the product range, and making some pretty big decisions on it. I think when CEOs come back to us in a few months and say, look, we've done all the data analysis, we've mapped all this, we've told the street this, but hopefully things have settled down, we've got a bit of visibility, we're going to do this with price, we've got this with suppliers. I think the next question is, okay, and now you have $100 million problem, Nadim, how are you going to fix it? And that's where I think we've got to be ready for that, and I think everyone's working on it, but we know what's coming. The next ask is, what are the next 2 or 3 or 4 big throws that you can make? And I think those throws are going to be more adventurous than some of what we've had to do in the past, and a lot more cross-functional, right? Getting right into product design, product development, markets, countries, channels, portfolio, pricing options. That's just what I feel. Yeah.
I think that's a really good point. One of the things we've talked about previously is, it's easy to view this as a supply chain problem. And some companies have sort of grown up with sales, you take care of revenue, marketing, you take care of new products, market share and introductions, and supply chain, you guys make the profits. You guys figured out how to make this profitable. Mm-hmm. The truth is, all of these are team sports. And in this world, this is not a supply chain problem. This is a business problem. And so being linked arm in arm with your compatriots on the commercial side is the most important thing to have real agility. It isn't only supply chain agility. Matter of fact, arguably the most important thing for us to have is business agility, because we may have to pull a pricing lever. We may have to pull a simplicity lever. We may have to sort of gear our new product orientation to what our current supply chain can support for a while. Those sorts of trade-offs, not everybody, in my experience, is sort of geared up to do. It's easy to sort of one in the old who do I point at, one throat kind of model to put it on supply chain, but we've reached places where these business issues are far more complex for a simple answer. So As we look at this, as we sort of drive to simplicity, we look at a multi-business or a broader business kind of solution for us. Are there things that you guys have learned to sort of how do you start building that bridge? What are the foundations you've laid so that you can have that discussion with the commercial guys? When has it worked really, really well for you, and what did you find you had to have in place? If I'm sitting there listening to us and I don't have that, what did you guys do? What levers do you pull?
Yeah, I think back to my earlier comment about control what you control and make sure that your house is in order in terms of the operational basics, right? Plan, source, make, deliver. How well do I operate those elements? Inside of those elements is how healthy is your culture, internal and external. Your internal team, how well in tune are they with the business? How well do they understand the end-to-end of supply chain? And how well are they willing to flex with you as you go through these waves of challenges? Then there's a similar need for relationships externally. Are your suppliers going to stay with you? It doesn't have to be 100% of your suppliers, but you got to have a handful of core suppliers that are going to do the same thing for you. They're going to go in and out of the crisis with you. They're going to have your back. They're going to be there with you to protect your revenue, and they're going to be there with you with creative ideas to help you with the bottom line. I think those are the fundamentals that you've got to have all the time, whether you're in a supply chain disruption or not. The better you're in control, the better you can deal with disruptions. The other piece that Peter was alluding to earlier is to have an 80-20 mindset. And that's a way to kind of segment and prioritize what you do. Generally, you'll find that 20% of your SKUs generate 80% of your revenue. 20% of your SKUs generate 80% of your profit. 20% of your customers generate 80% of your revenue. How well are you disproportionately allocating resources and attention to the 20% where you get greatest value from your efforts versus looking across the board and treating everybody the same way? That has brought tremendous value for me, in particular in my last assignment. And for me today, it's a rule of thumb. I think it works all the time.
Yeah, that's
Peter?
great. I think it's really nicely put, Nadim. I think the other aspect of it is, when this all first bubbled up, you jumped into the data warehouse, or was it a data lake? Now I can't remember. It's one of the two. Right? I don't like data lake because I don't swim very well. So you jump into the data warehouse and you grab the data of all the flows between the countries. And someone says, "Gosh, I'm really worried about Mexico." So you pull out the data, and you start a conversation with sales and marketing and product development, and the first reaction is, "Oh my gosh, we make that in Mexico?" Yes, we do. Yeah. What happens to it if we have a tariff of X%? So you work it out, and people are always looking for solutions very quickly. But I think it's partly back to what you're asking, John. It's this working through, segmenting all the flows and working it through and say, look, this here, it was never working as a product beforehand. If we hit it with a tariff, you probably just put the prices up and see what happens. Got it. Okay.
Right.
This one over here, we can move this. We can move this tomorrow. Well, why was it in Mexico? Well, because remember you asked for lower labor costs and we moved it. And oh yeah, that's right. Okay. And you solve those ones. It's the big chunk in the middle where I think we have to keep coming forward with ideas, which aren't always good ideas, but ideas to get that conversation going. Because you never know what a partner's going to say when you start laying out, well, I can't move this in the short term. If I did move it, it'd cost X. We wouldn't do that unless we knew this was going to persist. Oh my gosh, what can we do then? Well, I don't know. What do you think? And I think it's that messy middle part where we've got to take the lead with our sales, marketing, and R&D colleagues and say, these are the 2 or 3 options we have, and no one's going to like any of them. So what are we going to do? Let's have this conversation. Let's have a meaningful conversation about it and solve the 2 ends quickly. And then we're going to keep coming back to that middle part. And it's all part of the 80-20 that you referred to, Nadim. But, we've got to play this as a team game and say, well, what options have we not thought of? And I'll give you a great example. You look at poor Nike. I mean, they're a fabulous company. They've moved so much to Vietnam, and suddenly that happens. Mm-hmm. And the first question I would ask is, do we like being in Vietnam? Yes, we do. Right, so we're happy to be, all this aside, we're glad to be there. Great. Okay, so how does this change that perspective for us? This we can move, this we can price. Well, maybe we should be automating more. All right, okay. So maybe now we love Vietnam, now we need to love automation in Vietnam as well. I'm not speaking on behalf of Nike, I'm just using that as a particular example. You know, if automation is the example or the part of the answer, we bring it forward 3 to 5 years, is this really such a bad thing that's happened? You know, it's messy and awkward. But if we can help each other provoke what are our options and what can we make decisions on what do we need to be true, and what do we like about our supply chain? What do we like about where we were and what was working? And there are bits we just never were comfortable with. We can all name examples, the three of us. We can't do it on a call, but we've all got things that we're sourcing. We all looked at and thought, you know what? Given another chance, I wouldn't do that in a million years. Maybe
Right. And does this disruption provide the catalyst to go
Yeah.
after some of those things, some of the
Yeah.
stuff we've sort of left because we've
Yeah.
moved on to other challenges? That's an interesting point.
Yeah.
You know, I think as we look at this, it's interesting as this is unfolded. We went from the issue is tariffs, and the reality is the issue is disruption. We've gotten into a place where we're reaffirming that the best companies are going to be ones that have built a business structure that leverages commercial and technical resources to solve grid problems. From an operating standpoint, it's going back to the things that we can control, the things that we can measure, operating excellence as the foundation for everything we start working on, allowing us then to have discussions around simplification, around changing things that we can change in concert with our business partners. And I think the other thing that's been interesting is this really started out as a profit discussion. You know, how do I maintain my margins? How do I play defense? We've had some discussions over time on, well, if we're playing defense, someone must be playing offense. How do you navigate through that? And I'm reminded of something we talked about in a former segment, which is, you know, the first thing we actually have to do is ensure continuity of supply. We have to make sure that it's a privilege for us to be having a discussion around the margin because we're actually selling a case. I make no profit on the case I don't sell, I can't supply. And so being able to build that resilience in maybe is the discussion that we start with as we start talking about whether we have an optimized supply chain or we have a resilient one where we have visibility and can help navigate some of these disruptions. Hey, it's been great talking to you guys, Nadim, Kilzi, Peter, Gibbons. Thanks for joining us this week. If you like what we had to say and you're enjoying it, hit the thumbs up, subscribe, and then if you've got some feedback or comments, please pile on. We use that as a way to make these discussions better, to help serve you and for us to continue to learn and grow. Until next time, have a great day.